Hey guys, tonight you find yourself in Victorian London, where the air itself feels textured, thick with chimney soot, candle smoke, and the faint sweetness of lavender trying its best to survive. Before we begin, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Outside, the streets are slick with rain, and gas lamps hum like tired bees. You pull your coat closer.
A horse passes, hooves clattering on cobblestone, leaving a trail of steam that curls into the fog. Somewhere nearby, a woman empties a basin out her window, and the sound of water slapping stone makes you flinch before you remember. This is London, and that was not water. The smell hits you next. Something between wet iron, old bread, and human ambition. It's the perfume of progress, they said.
You hear distant laughter from a pub, mingled with the rattle of carriage wheels. The city is alive, breathing through 10,000 chimneys, each one coughing its own story into the grey sky. Candles flicker in narrow windows, curtains sway like tired lungs. You can almost taste the air, heavy, metallic, a little judgmental. But tonight we'll explore what the Victorians called cleanliness. You'll soon see that it wasn't quite the same as what you mean by the word. In this world, soap was science, baths were strategy, and odour was biography. A person's smell could define their class faster than clothing ever could. You'll discover how people fought filth with vinegar, perfume, and denial. How doctors swore that dirt made you stronger, and how clean was often more dangerous than dirty. It's a strange, fascinating paradox. The era that gave us plumbing also gave us body powder made from arsenic. So, get comfortable. The candles are burning low. The rain has softened into a whisper against the glass. And somewhere far below, the city is still awake, brushing, scrubbing, sweating, and perfuming itself in ways that would make you shiver. Tonight, we'll walk through that world together. We'll smell its secrets, hear its rituals, and learn how the Victorians tried, and often failed, to stay clean. You wake before sunrise, and the first thing you notice isn't the light, it's the smell. Coal smoke, candle wax, and damp linen mix in the air like perfume that's forgotten its purpose. Every breath feels earned. The city's scent never leaves you. It clings to hair, fabric, even dreams. In Victorian London, this was the aroma of progress. Thick, grey, and honest. Clean air was for the countryside. In the city, cleanliness had to be invented daily, and it never lasted past noon. The streets outside hum with labour. Chimney sweeps whistle to each other through fog. Bakers open their shutters, releasing a wave of warm yeast into the cold. People say a good morning depends on the first smell you encounter. If that's true, most Victorians began their days somewhere between hunger and regret. Odour was democracy. No one escaped it. It didn't matter how rich you were, the city shared its breath equally. Inside, homes fought their own battles. Curtains reeked of smoke, carpets of mud, and wallpaper of mildew. Even freshly washed hands smelled faintly of the soap's ambition. Lavender, struggling to hide lie. The Victorians believed in fragrance as philosophy. If you smelled clean, maybe you were. Perfume became moral armor. The more one stank, the more perfume they applied, until the air itself grew dizzy. Doctors warned that strong smells could kill, but not in the way you think. They blamed miasma, invisible clouds of corruption that floated from rot, waste, and sin. A foul odor wasn't just unpleasant, it was proof of spiritual weakness. That's why people burned incense, vinegar, and even gunpowder indoors, trying to fight invisible devils with scented smoke. Every nose became a theologian. Women carried handkerchiefs soaked in peppermint oil to fend off disease and despair. Men smoked pipes to create private weather systems around themselves. The city was a duel of fragrances, each scent declaring its own innocence. If you've ever walked into a perfume store and felt slightly ill, you've already time-traveled. Soon you'll see how the entire hygiene culture of the Victorian era was built not on health, but on fear. Fear of smell, fear of contagion, fear of being mistaken for the unwashed poor. The cleaner people tried to appear, the more paranoid they became about odor. Cleanliness wasn't comfort, it was competition. Every doorway became a boundary between inside and outside, purity and contagion. Windows stayed shut in winter to keep bad air out, trapping worse air inside. Candles flickered against fogged glass like small, nervous hearts. You noticed the quiet rhythm of survival. Not fresh, not sterile, but determined. At night, London exhaled everything it had held back. Smoke crawled through cracks, rats skittered in drains, and somewhere, beneath layers of polite civility, the city sweated. It smelled alive, unpleasantly, unapologetically alive, and that, to a Victorian nose, was the scent of home. The poor didn't have the luxury of pretending. Their bodies smelled of labour and lard, their homes of cabbage and courage. They didn't apologise for it. In some ways, they were the most honest people in London. The rich tried to bottle heaven, the poor simply survived earth. The next morning, the cycle began again. A city bathing in smoke, perfuming itself in denial. You breathe in, realizing the smell is part of the story, the prelude to every habit, every superstition, every ritual that followed. Soon you'll understand why soap was never just soap. The Victorians didn't mask filth. They negotiated with it, and in that negotiation, they built an entire civilization of scent. The first sound of morning is the creak of a pump handle. A maid leans into it, her breath visible in the cold, arms trembling as the iron groans. Water finally spills out, brownish, metallic, and colder than truth. It smells faintly of rust and riverweed. Clean water, in this time, is fantasy. Most homes share one supply pipe. Some share diseases too, yet every drop is precious, even if it comes with a side of typhoid. Baths are rare, reserved for the brave or the reckless. The average Londoner washes by parts, hands, face, maybe neck, if company's coming. Full immersion is risky. They say it opens the pores, inviting illness straight into the soul. Doctors call it overstimulation. You might call it Tuesday. Still some try. They heat buckets over stoves, mix the water with prayers, and hope for forgiveness. The upper class bathe differently, with confidence and servants. Hot baths in copper tubs, perfumed with rose oil or even champagne. But even the rich share one dirty secret. The water used for rinsing usually came from the Thames. And the Thames, at this point, was less river, more soup. It carried everything London didn't want to think about: waste, factory runoff, dead animals, and ambition. Imagine drawing your bathwater while watching a barge of sewage float past your window. You'd add extra lavender too. Victorians believed that if something smelled floral, it must be safe. They weren't entirely wrong. The perfume at least distracted from the flavour. Poorer families washed in tin basins, often reusing the same water for everyone in the house. The order mattered: father first, mother next, children last. By the end, the water resembled weak tea with regrets. Yet even that ritual felt luxurious. Warmth itself was an event. Public baths eventually appeared. Small miracles of brick and steam. For a penny, anyone could soak, scrub, and remember dignity. These buildings smelled like soap, coal, and democracy. Cleanliness became less of a privilege and more of a possibility. The sound of dripping echoed like applause. Still, the myth of water's danger persisted. Mothers warned children not to bathe on cold days or during storms. "The air might enter your skin," they said, meaning death. It wasn't madness, just science in progress. You can't blame them for being cautious. Their world didn't yet know about germs, only ghosts. We'll return to this fear later, when you learn how Victorians invented hygiene rituals that had nothing to do with health and everything to do with hope. For now, remember the feeling of that first splash. Cold, shocking, and strangely holy. To wash in this era was to gamble. Sometimes you left the basin cleaner. Sometimes you left it haunted. The act of bathing wasn't just physical. It was moral theatre. Every drop of water told society how virtuous you were, how civilized, how different from those who didn't have enough. In a city obsessed with status, even soap was political. And somewhere, in a quiet alley, a boy cupped his hands under a leaking pipe, laughing as the water bit his skin. For a moment, it was just water again, not danger, not symbol, just life. You hear it before you see it, the soft slap of hands against skin, the rhythm of routine. A small bar of soap sits on the washstand like a relic from a cleaner universe. Its scent, sharp, alkaline, and vaguely floral, fills the room long before it lathers. To the Victorian mind, soap was not comfort, but conquest. Every scrape of suds was an act of moral improvement, a daily argument with entropy. Clean skin meant a clean conscience. But soap was not yet the familiar white block you imagine. Early bars were crude mixtures of animal fat, ash, and hope. They smelled faintly of farmyards and factories, of honesty unperfumed. Only the rich could afford the luxury of refinement, triple-milled French soaps shaped like jewels. The poor made do with brown, soft lumps that dissolved faster than guilt. Still, even the humblest bar promised transformation, if only temporary. Manufacturers began marketing cleanliness as status. Advertisements depicted glowing women washing away sin, children beaming with purity, men gazing proudly at their reflection. The message was clear. Dirt was not merely physical, it was moral. A dirty man was lazy, a dirty woman suspect. Soap thus became both product and sermon. You can almost hear the echo of those slogans in today's commercials, just with fewer corsets. The ritual itself was slow. A pitcher of lukewarm water, a cloth, and a moment of quiet before the day's chaos. People washed hands, faces, maybe behind the ears if feeling indulgent. The smell of soap lingered in the air like a hymn. It mattered because it gave structure to survival, a small ceremony repeated by millions. Even misery needs choreography. Children were taught that soap kept away sickness and sin in equal measure. Mothers scrubbed with devotion, believing they could wash fate off their offspring. It was hope disguised as hygiene. Sometimes the scrubbing drew blood, sometimes tears. Still, they believed, It's hard to laugh at superstition when it smells faintly of lavender. Factories churned out bars by the ton, filling the air with chemical sweetness. Workers left smelling cleaner than the homes they returned to. London began to shimmer faintly under a glaze of soap dust. The city that once feared water now embraced its bubbly cousin. Progress, after all, needed a pleasant scent. But there was irony beneath the lather. The same factories that made soap also polluted the rivers that made washing necessary. Cleanliness created its own dirt. The Victorians didn't notice, or pretended not to. You can't judge them too harshly. Denial, too, is a cleansing ritual. Soap advertisements grew poetic. Purity in a bar, a breath of spring, the fragrance of virtue. Behind the slogans, child labourers stirred vats with blistered hands. The bars they made were destined for parlours far grander than their dreams. Yet even they believed in the magic. Maybe that's what soap really sold, the illusion of control. Soon, soap became a kind of social password. To smell of it was to belong. To lack it was to invite suspicion. People sniffed each other the way modern society scrolls profiles, seeking signs of respectability. Cleanliness had become performative long before social media arrived. As evening fell, the scent of soap softened into something nostalgic. It lingered on pillowcases, in hair, on fingertips. Clean skin glowed under candlelight, proof that one had survived another day without visible shame. It's no wonder the Victorians slept soundly. Exhaustion, after all, smells sweet. Soap didn't just wash away dirt, it washed away the illusion of permanence. Every bar shrank a little each day, like time itself. Perhaps that's why people loved it. In a world obsessed with decay, here was something designed to disappear gracefully. And tomorrow the ritual would begin again. Same bar, smaller now, same promise, slightly weaker. Just like faith, just like hope, just like all things that cleanse but never cure. The morning chill bites first at your ankles, the price of fashion. Victorian clothing wasn't just worn, it was endured. Wool, linen, velvet, and lace layered upon each other like geological strata of vanity. Each fabric trapped heat, dust, and the city's unspoken truths. The scent of London lived in these clothes. Coal smoke, perfume, sweat, and the faint sweetness of starch. Dressing each day was less about modesty and more about armor. For women, the ritual began early. Corsets tightened, stays pulled, and chemises tucked like secrets. The average waist was less anatomy, more aspiration. The tightness wasn't just physical, it was social. To be respectable, one had to look constrained. The irony? The cleaner a lady appeared, the more unclean she felt beneath the weight. A polite smile concealed bruised ribs and faint hearts. Men fared no better, starched collars stiff enough to cut skin, wool coats heavy as regret. Their wardrobes smelled faintly of damp tobacco and furniture polish. In an era without deodorant, one relied on patience and powder. A gentleman's dignity was measured by how long he could endure discomfort without complaint. You could say suffering was the true cologne of the Victorian age. Laundry was its own form of warfare. Without washing machines, clothing had to be boiled, beaten, and wrung by hand. The sound of women slapping wet cloth against stone echoed through alleys like applause for survival. Soap bubbles floated briefly before collapsing, little symbols of futility. Clean shirts cost sweat, white dresses cost blood. Every spotless collar was an unpaid confession. Water shortages made things worse. Families reused the same wash water until it resembled soup. Ironing followed, a delicate operation performed with heavy irons heated over coals. The smell of scorched linen was everywhere, like the city's signature fragrance. Still, they persisted. Clean clothing wasn't just pride, it was proof of resilience. The wealthy sent their garments to professional laundresses, women whose hands aged twice as fast as their faces. They lived surrounded by steam, damp cloth, and whispers. Payment was meager, gratitude rare. Yet they held the city's dignity in their wrinkled palms. Each shirt, each petticoat, a small resurrection of decency. Clothing, like everything else, divided classes. The poor wore practicality, wool and leather, unpolished and honest. The rich wore symbolism, fabrics that declared victory over weather and work. A silk glove said, "I don't dig." A starched cravat said, "I don't sweat." The message was clear, even when the scent was not. Children's clothes were another matter entirely, layers upon layers, as though protection could be sewn. They played in mud and coal dust, then stood in line for scolding and scrubbing. Their laughter, at least, was clean. Childhood was the only luxury still affordable. Tailors and dressmakers thrived, stitching ambition into every seam. The click of scissors, the hum of thread, the smell of new fabric, all parts of the city's heartbeat. Fashion changed faster than sanitation could keep up. New styles meant new ways to trap sweat. Progress, it seemed, always smelled slightly human. As night arrived, people undressed by candlelight. Clothes hung on chairs, still warm from the day's burdens. Some whispered prayers before folding them. Others simply sighed. The silence of disrobing was intimate, almost sacred. The city shedding its disguise. And by morning, the garments would be donned again, stiff with yesterday's effort, perfumed with tomorrow's hope. London dressed not to impress, but to endure. And somehow, through lace and soot, it managed to look magnificent. Morning light lands softly on a mirror clouded by breath. You run a comb through your hair, each stroke a slow negotiation with tangles and time. For Victorians, grooming wasn't vanity, it was survival. Hair carried everything the city offered: soot, perfume, anxiety. A person's scent began there, and so did judgment. The average Londoner brushed twice a day, not from science but superstition, believing that friction alone could cleanse what water might ruin. Men greased their hair with pomades of bear fat, beeswax, and mystery. Women used mixtures of rosewater, brandy, and vinegar, creating clouds of fragrance that followed them like polite ghosts. When the wind shifted, London smelled faintly of fermentation and ambition. It mattered because identity was aromatic. To smell respectable was to exist correctly. Dry humour, deodorant for the soul. Washing hair was risky business. Water was feared, towels scarce, and drying took hours by the weak warmth of a fire. Many brushed instead, believing that movement purified. The sound of bristles against scalp filled homes like rain on rooftops, repetitive, soothing, hypnotic. It wasn't cleanliness, it was ritual disguised as rhythm. Barbershops became confessionals. Men discussed politics, weather, and heartbreak beneath the hiss of razors and cologne. The smell of bay rum and tobacco was universal male perfume. Women's salons were smaller temples. thick with gossip and lavender water. Every snip was an exchange of secrets. Hygiene, for once, felt social. Skin told stories clothing couldn't hide. Pale meant privilege, proof one could afford to avoid sunlight and labor. Tanning was scandalous, as though the sun itself had poor manners. Powdered faces glowed under candlelight, soft and ghostly. Many powders contained lead, mercury, or dreams. The Victorians called it complexion perfection. Modern translation: poison that photographs beautifully. Men applied cologne liberally, believing it disinfected as well as impressed. Doctors encouraged it. Wives pretended to believe. The upper class drowned themselves in scent, strong enough to outlast both dinner and doubt. When someone entered a room, their smell arrived 5 seconds early. Status had an aroma, and it was rarely subtle. Massage and skin tonics appeared in advertisements promising revitalization of the blood. Few understood what that meant, but everyone wanted it. Lotions containing ammonia, arsenic, and camphor promised youth with every sting. Beauty was endurance disguised as elegance. If pain accompanied results, it only proved sincerity. Children, too, were scrubbed nightly. Small rituals performed by tired mothers using rough cloth and colder water. The scrubbing wasn't gentle, but it was love. Scented soap on fragile skin, whispered scoldings softened by care. Cleanliness became tenderness in motion, dry humor, affection with calluses. For the poor, hygiene tools were treasures: a shared comb, a cracked mirror, a brush missing teeth. Still, they performed the same gestures, repeating civilization through touch. The body might ache, the world might judge, but the ritual continued. It mattered because repetition creates dignity. Even sickness had etiquette. Visitors brought handkerchiefs soaked in vinegar, believing it shielded them from infection. Hospitals smelled like disinfectant dreams. Sharp, stinging, righteous. The human touch, when it happened, was brief but real. A gloved hand counted your pulse. A nurse whispered faith disguised as instruction. At night, the city's collective exhalation smelled of soap, smoke, and skin. Pillows held the day's residue: perfume, exhaustion, survival. It was human in its imperfection, and somehow that made it beautiful. The Victorians sought purity, but what they found was persistence. Tomorrow, the comb will glide again, the same strokes, the same sigh. Cleanliness fades quickly, but ritual lasts forever. The first thing you notice is the chill. Victorian bedrooms rarely saw the luxury of central heat. Warmth came from breath, blankets, and optimism. Curtains hung heavy with dust, trapping the scent of humanity, candle wax, wool, and whispered fatigue. Beds were grand but deceptive, carved mahogany frames dressed in damp linens. To sleep cleanly was impossible. To sleep at all was a victory. Mattresses were stuffed with straw, horsehair, or if luck smiled, feathers. They creaked like conscience. Beneath, chamber pots waited, unglamorous companions in the nightly war against plumbing's absence. The smell lingered politely, ignored by custom. "Good night," they said, pretending not to notice. Etiquette was the air freshener of the 19th century. Pillows held secrets. They were never washed, only beaten, fluffed, and resented. Sweat and dreams mingled invisibly. The Victorians believed this intimacy harmless. After all, What could the unseen harm? The answer, they'd learn later, was quite a lot. Germs hadn't yet entered polite conversation. Nightclothes varied by class. The rich slept in linen gowns embroidered with initials the poor wore yesterday. Clean sheets signaled morality. Visitors often judged a family by their laundry line. The notion that domestic purity equaled divine favor was so common that washing day felt almost religious. Soap replaced incense. Candles guttered on bedside tables, dripping wax like slow applause. Their scent, tallow and faint rose, filled the room with fragile calm. Shadows danced across wallpaper, hiding imperfections that daylight would later betray. Sleep itself felt ceremonial, the final act of respectability. Dry aside, insomnia was considered impolite. Maidservants performed nightly duties with mechanical grace, turning down covers, heating bricks for foot warmers, whispering wishes of good rest they never enjoyed themselves. Their beds, narrow and cold, awaited elsewhere, beneath staircases or behind kitchens. Hygiene, like comfort, flowed downhill. Children shared beds, sometimes entire families sharing one mattress for warmth. Privacy was a luxury colder than winter itself. Still, laughter echoed under blankets, stories were whispered until breath clouded the air. It mattered because love adapts to discomfort. Modern analogy: charging your phone under the same blanket that hides your flaws. The wealthy fought odors with potpourri, scented sachets, and bowls of vinegar. Bedrooms resembled apothecaries, each corner designed to trap air in polite deception. Even sickness was choreographed. Windows cracked just enough to let in repentance but not remedy. Fresh air was fashionable only when it didn't interrupt conversation. Bedbugs thrived, invisible guests with impeccable taste. Doctors prescribed camphor, sulfur, and optimism. Scratching was socially discouraged. Denial was preferred. A well-bred woman didn't itch. She merely adjusted her posture thoughtfully. Morning began with cold water splashed on tired faces. The first shiver of the day reminded everyone that cleanliness required courage. Beds were remade, odors forgiven, and the illusion of control restored. Hygiene was less about purity than perseverance. And as night returned, the city once again climbed under its collective blanket of fog. The same beds, the same rituals, the same restless gratitude. Cleanliness might have failed, but comfort, however fragile, endured. Steam curls against frosted glass, soft as a sigh. You sit in a copper tub, the water faintly brown, the air thick with lavender oil and coal smoke. The illusion is perfect. Luxury distilled into heat. But beneath that warmth lies deception. Victorians believed that bathing purified the soul, yet most tubs were filled with recycled river water, rich in bacteria and hope. Cleanliness here was a performance, not an achievement. You leave the bath shining, not safer. In wealthy homes, baths were social spectacles. Guests admired their hosts' marble basins as though virtue could be measured in plumbing. Hot water was a symbol of triumph over nature, yet even the grandest bathrooms had limits. Pipes leaked, drains gurgled, and servants carried buckets by candlelight like medieval alchemists. Every bath was a small opera, fragrant, precarious, slightly ridiculous. For the poor, the experience was more biblical. One basin, one pitcher, one chance. Families washed in shifts, each lowering their expectations with the temperature. The last bather faced a tub that looked like weak tea. Still, they scrubbed diligently because filth had a moral smell. In Victorian logic, dirt was destiny and soap was salvation. Doctors debated the correct frequency of bathing, once a week, once a month, or when guilt demanded. Some claimed too much washing weakened the nerves, even inviting hysteria. Others insisted cold baths toughened the spirit. The result was confusion wrapped in condensation. People bathed as often as they could afford clarity. Hotels and spas monetized hygiene. Hydrotherapy promised to heal heartbreak, gout, and sin. People paid to be sprayed, dunked, or wrapped in wet blankets under the supervision of men with moustaches and confidence. It mattered because suffering was still fashionable. Modern parallel. Juice cleanses, just with less plumbing. Women's magazines published recipes for homemade baths. Milk for softness. Oatmeal for modesty. Vinegar for discipline. The mixtures bubbled with good intentions and questionable chemistry. You imagine an entire generation of women steeping like herbal tea, glowing with both pride and dermatitis. Evening baths were considered sensual, sometimes scandalous. Curtains drawn, locks checked twice, candles trembling like witnesses. A woman alone with hot water was an idea that unsettled moralists. Warmth itself was temptation. Some claimed steam loosened not just pores, but principles. You smile. Guilt has always been a poor scientist. Children were scrubbed like dishes, squealing as soap met resistance. Mothers scolded, fathers supervised, both pretending this was affection. The smell of carbolic soap filled nurseries like victory. It mattered because control began early. Clean children became clean citizens, or so they hoped. Public bathhouses, though well-intentioned, became breeding grounds for gossip and germs alike. Steam blurred faces, equality dissolved in heat. The poor left cleaner, but no safer. Yet for a brief hour, everyone shared the same illusion, that warmth could erase circumstance. By night, used bathwater sloshed down drains, returning to the same rivers it came from. London's cycle of purification completed itself in irony. You can almost hear the city chuckle beneath the fog. And as the candles dimmed, people slept easier, believing they had conquered dirt. They hadn't, but belief, too, has a scent, faint, sweet, and comforting enough to dream in. You bite into a cold morning apple and hear the crunch of courage. In Victorian times, dentistry was a battlefield fought without anesthesia. A toothache wasn't an inconvenience, it was a moral test. Clean mouths were rare, and smiles were carefully rationed. The smell of clove oil and fear hung over every dentist's chair. Yet, even without modern tools, Victorians invented beauty, or at least the illusion of it. One tooth at a time, toothbrushes were luxury items, carved from bone and bristle, shared by families or lovers. Hygiene was intimate by necessity. The poor relied on salt, soot, or crushed chalk. Some even rubbed their teeth with rags soaked in vinegar, trading enamel for optimism. White teeth weren't common, they were aspirational, like literacy. The first toothpaste recipes read like spells. Charcoal, honey, and powdered brick mixed into a gritty promise. Advertisers swore it would make your smile civilized. Doctors disagreed quietly while selling their own formulas. Competition smelled of peppermint and deceit. You can almost picture an entire generation grinning through discomfort. False teeth, ironically, were more common among the rich. Ivory, porcelain, even teeth from the recently deceased were shaped into smiles for sale. The trade was discreet but booming. Dentists paid grave robbers by the molar. Some dentures clicked when their owners spoke, like applause from beyond. Dry humor. Early influences of confidence. Women were warned that laughter could damage their image. Smiling too wide revealed imperfection. Smiling too rarely revealed guilt. A respectable mouth was a closed one. Perfume, not toothpaste, carried their intentions. You sensed the tension, how something as simple as breath could define destiny. Mouthwash was another miracle of marketing. Recipes mixed alcohol, herbs, and sometimes ammonia, promising breath as pure as morning. Few noticed that morning in London smelled like coal. Still, people swished dutifully, eyes watering, pride intact. Hygiene often began with self-deception. Dentists charged high fees. So many avoided them until pain screamed louder than poverty. A tooth pulled cost a shilling and a prayer. Instruments glinted under lamplight, and the sound, that dry metallic snap, stayed with you longer than the pain. Some fainted. Others simply aged 10 years in a minute. The rich imported gold fillings from Paris, displayed them like subtle jewelry. The poor simply learned to smile less. Dental hygiene, like everything else, followed the hierarchy of air. Breath itself had class. Children learned by imitation. Mothers dipped brushes into homemade powders. Fathers gargled theatrically. The smell of mint became a symbol of ambition. Even if no one could see your clean teeth, they could feel your effort. Pride often tastes metallic. Advertisements showed perfect smiles framed by lace collars, teeth that glowed whiter than logic. People bought the dream, not the result. Commerce thrives on the promise that discomfort is optional. At night, dentures slept in glasses of water beside their owners. The image is oddly poetic, a city of smiles resting in silence. Tomorrow they would grin again, polished, borrowed, and brave. Victorians never quite mastered oral hygiene, but they perfected its performance. Clean teeth meant control, even when pain said otherwise. You close your eyes and taste peppermint mixed with denial, the flavor of progress. A faint mist of perfume drifts through a sitting room, violet, musk, and something less polite beneath. The air tastes expensive. In Victorian London, perfume wasn't luxury, it was defense, a veil between body and suspicion. Yet behind every scent was a chemistry lesson gone wrong. Many perfumes contained arsenic, mercury, or alcohol so strong it could ignite from candlelight. To smell beautiful was to gamble with physics, but danger, like fragrance, lingers best in memory. Women dabbed scent on gloves, fans, and the insides of letters. Perfume was intimacy distilled. It traveled farther than words, promising refinement while hiding decay. Some wore fragrances with names like Essence of Virtue or Morning Innocence. The irony was obvious only later. They believed scent could elevate morality, that purity could be bottled. Dry humor, capitalism's first sermon in glass. Men's colognes were sharper. Bay rum, sandalwood, and ambition. Barbershops reeked of power and disinfectant dreams. Gentlemen perfumed their handkerchiefs before meetings, as though success required olfactory reinforcement. The smell of musk in Parliament halls was almost political. You could tell party affiliation by fragrant strength. Cleanliness had a manifesto. Perfume vendors lined busy streets, their bottles glinting under grey skies. They mixed scents in open air, the fragrance swirling with soot and irony. The best sellers promised invisibility, to mask sweat, coal, or conscience. Buyers leaned close, testing purity on wrists already stained by life. London smelled like roses pretending not to choke. Poison entered quietly. Cheap perfumes used arsenic to create brighter colours and longer-lasting notes. Users complained of headaches, rashes, and fainting spells of charm. Doctors warned against overuse, but what was moderation to a society obsessed with appearing immortal? Vanity was the most respectable illness of the age. Perfume bottles themselves were art, crystal flasks shaped like teardrops or prayers. Women carried them in small purses, dabbing between conversations, each gesture rehearsed, delicate, meaningful. Scent was punctuation for speech. The faint trail of rosewater became a language of desire. One sniff and a room's hierarchy changed. Not everyone could afford it. The poor mimicked perfume with orange peels, vinegar, or smoke. Some boiled herbs in pots, letting steam perfume tiny rooms. Those scents were humbler but more honest, less poison, more perseverance. When luxury kills, simplicity survives. Perfume also marked mourning. After funerals, some wore violet or cypress oil to symbolize grief. The same bottle might later be used on wedding days, a small rebellion against permanence. Scent ignored context, it simply remembered. In that way, every fragrance was history's accomplice. Scientists tried to rationalize perfume's effect. They claimed pleasant smells purified the air by replacing bad ones. No one questioned the logic. Londoners were tired of questioning. They inhaled deeply, convincing themselves that beauty disinfected. It's an illusion modern air fresheners would envy. Perfume stores became sanctuaries. Women lingered there longer than churches. The smell of jasmine and alcohol numbed thoughts of mortality. Inside those glass walls, they believed cleanliness could be purchased in ounces. Dry remark, salvation, now available in floral. As night fell, the city's air thickened with layers of scent. Cheap and rich colliding, mingling, equalizing. London became a symphony of decay disguised as elegance. You breathe it in, and it's intoxicating. The sweetness, the deceit, the strange comfort of shared delusion. By dawn, the fragrance fades, but not completely. Like every lie told kindly, it leaves a trace. Subtle, beautiful, and impossible to forget. Imagine the air of a crowded ballroom. Velvet, candlelight, perfume, and under all that, humanity. The Victorians lived before deodorant, before sprays or roll-ons, or even the courage to admit sweat existed. Bodies did what bodies do, and society pretended not to notice. Instead, they layered more fabric, more fragrance, more distance. To smell of anything natural was to confess to being alive, which was, of course, vulgar. Sweat was class-coded. Labourers dripped visibly, aristocrats merely glowed. The same moisture that betrayed effort on one body signified vitality on another. Etiquette books advised ladies to remain temperate in exertion, which was polite language for don't move too much. It mattered because movement risked odor, and odor risked reputation. Doctors offered odd solutions: vinegar rubs, alum powder, or camphor crystals worn in pockets. None worked, but all were sold with confidence. The British Empire may have conquered continents, but perspiration remained undefeated. Modern irony. Still does. People stuffed small bags of herbs or lavender into sleeves and corsets. Some pinned rose petals inside hats, trusting in floral optimism. Men carried handkerchiefs steeped in cologne, ready to wave away both smell and suspicion. The air shimmered with effort, a civilization built on denial's perfume. Bathing wasn't frequent enough to help. Instead, undergarments acted as sponges, layers of linen designed to absorb and disguise. Servants laundered them daily, wringing out the city's secrets. The smell of boiling clothes filled back alleys like penance. Laundry day was less chore, more confession. In theatres, churches, and trains, air turned communal. Fans fluttered like nervous wings. Gentlemen discreetly adjusted cravats to create ventilation. The collective heat felt intimate and embarrassing, like an unspoken truth shared too widely. Yet nobody mentioned it. Silence was the best deodorant. The cosmetics industry seized the opportunity. Powders promised to refresh the body and sweeten the disposition. Some contained lead, others talc mined with more optimism than safety. People dusted themselves daily, leaving ghostly trails wherever they walked. The air sparkled faintly, but no magic, just dust, pretending to be dignity. When sweat betrayed even the rich, they blamed architecture. Drawing rooms became larger, ceilings higher, windows wider. The solution to odor was space. The poor, packed in tenements, had no such luxury. Their scent was their address. Society used its nose as a compass of judgment. Fashion adapted: lace underarms, armpit shields, and detachable pads sewn into gowns. These dress protectors were tiny miracles of embarrassment. They soaked silently, washed privately, discussed never. It's oddly charming, the lengths people went to avoid being human. Summer was scandal season. Heat melted manners. Perfume fought valiantly, but the air always won. Newspapers published tips for remaining fresh in society's warmth, as though dignity were temperature sensitive. The advice never worked, but it sold column space beautifully. By night, the truth returned. Perfume faded, collars wilted, gloves dampened. People exhaled relief in the dark, unbuttoning respectability. The city smelled like honesty for a few brief hours before morning discipline resumed. In the absence of deodorant, Victorians invented something else: composure. They learned to sit still, breathe shallowly, and endure with grace. Perhaps that's what elegance truly is, the art of not flinching at your own reality. The sound of a cistern fills the silence like applause. You stand in a small room tiled in hope, the faint smell of ammonia and lavender competing for authority. The Victorian toilet, a triumph of invention and denial, promised modernity, but delivered only confusion. Pipes groaned, leaks whispered secrets, and beneath the porcelain elegance lurked chaos. Every flush sent both relief and uncertainty into the same direction: the Thames. London was learning to wash its hands, badly. At first, Toilets were luxury curiosities, heavy contraptions with brass levers, mahogany seats, and the confidence of things not yet tested. Only the rich owned them. The poor used pots, alleys, or imagination. Still, society adored the idea of progress. A flushing toilet meant civilization had arrived, even if it still smelled medieval. Early plumbing was bold but naive. Engineers believed water could carry anything away, ignoring where away actually was. Waste traveled through brick sewers designed centuries earlier for rainwater, not humanity. When storms came, the system burped its guilt into the streets. You can picture polite Victorians stepping carefully, convinced progress required patience and long boots. Perfume tried to help. Toilet waters, ironically named, filled bathrooms with citrus and deceit. Candles burned continuously, more for courage than fragrance. People believed that if a room smelled acceptable, it was safe. Miasma theory still ruled the mind. The idea that odor itself caused disease, germs were invisible, smell was villain enough. Public facilities appeared next. Grand lavatories decorated like ballrooms, complete with attendants and mirrors. Public comfort stations, they called them, though comfort was relative. Men entered confidently. Women hesitated, fearing moral contamination more than physical. Even the act of cleanliness was gendered. Privacy for men, propriety for women. Chamber pots didn't disappear overnight. They remained under beds, loyal and discreet. Servants emptied them each morning with a humility that defied description. The sound of porcelain clinking on cobblestone was London's unofficial sunrise. Those who could afford silver pots pretended dignity had fragrance. Those who couldn't opened windows. The Great Stink of 1858 changed everything. Heat intensified the city's secret perfume until even Parliament fled. It forced innovation. Joseph Bazalgette's sewer system rose from necessity, a cathedral for waste. His underground tunnels were heroic in scale, poetic in irony. Civilization, it turned out, needed plumbing more than philosophy. Still, superstition lingered. Some feared flushing at night disturbed spirits. Others thought toilets inhaled disease when empty. Housewives left lids closed like prayers. Bathrooms became microcosms of anxiety. Shining white rooms filled with quiet dread. Toilet paper was another late arrival. Before its debut, Londoners used newspaper, wool, or nothing. Early paper squares were sold in perfumed boxes labeled "medicated for the refined." They weren't soft, but they were symbolic, proof that comfort had entered commerce. Children were taught toilet etiquette before table manners. Never linger, mothers warned, and never discuss what lingers after. Cleanliness was silence disguised as civility. Modern comparison, closing browser tabs quickly. By night, the city's drains sang faintly underfoot, a lullaby of running water and forgotten consequence. The toilets gleamed upstairs, triumphant and ignorant, monuments to progress that still smelled faintly of history. And so, the Victorians flushed with pride, unaware that beneath their feet, London's true soul was learning to flow. You hear it before you see it, the scrape of porcelain against wood, the quiet clink of necessity. The chamber pot, humble and honest, ruled the night for most Victorians. It sat under every bed like a loyal secret. At dawn, servants carried it away, faces polite, hands practiced. It wasn't glamorous, but it was civilization's unsung companion, closer to people than any invention dared to be. The poor shared theirs among family, treating it as communal property. Children learned early to balance decency with urgency. A full pot meant survival had continued one more night. A spill meant embarrassment that would echo through breakfast. You can almost hear the nervous laughter of practicality. Design varied wildly. Some pots were plain and chipped, others gilded and painted with flowers, pretending elegance could outshine odor. Guests admired them in parlors, pretending not to understand their purpose. That was Victorian grace, hypocrisy, polished until it looked like decorum. Night soil collectors moved through alleys before sunrise, their carts creaking with the city's confession. They were the invisible workforce, shoveling what society couldn't admit to producing. The smell was unbearable, the pay worse. Yet without them, London would have drowned in its own denial. Dry humour. Heroes without capes, but with clothespins. Water closets remained unreliable, so chamber pots endured. Servants emptied dozens daily, their bodies memorizing routes between bedrooms and yards. Some sang softly to distract from the smell. Others prayed. Every splash told a story of endurance too impolite for history books. For the wealthy, pots became status symbols, porcelain painted by hand, embossed with initials, stored in mahogany cabinets. Etiquette manuals advised that a true gentleman's pot should match his china set. The line between hygiene and theatre blurred completely. In boarding houses, privacy was impossible. Thin walls, shared corridors, and the unmistakable sound of porcelain in motion. People coughed to disguise the noise, laughed to forget it, and carried on. Society built entire moral codes around not mentioning what everyone did nightly. Civilization, at its core, was a well-timed distraction. Hotels offered chamber pots as amenities, proudly listed in advertisements. Fresh linens and sanitary vessels provided, one claimed. Guests read the words with gratitude, pretending the comfort was modernity rather than survival. History rarely distinguishes between the two. Accidents happened. Pots cracked, overflowed, or betrayed their owners mid-transport. Servants bore the blame, of course. Apologies were whispered. Air fresheners did not yet exist. The smell lingered like uninvited honesty. People forgave easily because they understood. Hygiene was ambition, not achievement. When plumbing finally improved, the chamber pot didn't vanish. It retired. Many families kept theirs, cleaned and displayed like trophies of endurance. Some used them for flowers, others for irony. A few, perhaps, for nostalgia. After all, no object knew its owners more intimately. In museums today, they gleam under glass, labeled domestic artifacts. Visitors giggle, imagining absurdity, but if you listen closely, you'll hear respect for an age that survived discomfort with elegance. The chamber pot may have smelled terrible, but it carried dignity quietly, like steam rising into morning air. By sunrise, servants poured the last of the night away. The city exhaled, pretending its conscience was clean. And as breakfast fires lit, no one mentioned what had happened before the tea. Silence, once again, washed everything spotless. The smell of sulphur hits first, sharp, rotten, strangely comforting. Steam coils through the tiled room like a sermon without an audience. You sit in a wooden tub filled with mineral water that stains the air yellow. The Victorians called it healing. Your skin calls it negotiation. Bathhouses like these promised miracles to draw out disease, purify blood, and calm nervous hysteria. The water felt alive, hissing softly against hope. People soaked in discomfort and called it medicine. Spas across England marketed their waters as divine. Bath, Harrogate, and Buxton became pilgrimage sites for the weary and wealthy. Aristocrats floated in sulphur pools, discussing literature between coughs. Some brought servants to hold towels and skepticism. Doctors claimed minerals restored balance to the body's humours. Balance was a polite word for luck. Modern echo. Wellness retreats selling rest to those too tired to relax. Bathhouses were architectural poetry. Domes, mosaics, marble floors reflecting light and ambition. They smelled of soap, steam, and subtle arrogance. To bathe publicly was to announce both privilege and participation in progress. The rich soaked for rejuvenation, the poor for relief. The water didn't discriminate, even if society did. Some baths added electricity, mild shocks delivered through brass plates submerged in water. Electrohydrotherapy, they called it. The tingling sensation was said to revive nerves, though it mostly startled them. Patients left glowing, either from circulation or terror. The Victorians believed discomfort was proof of efficacy. Pain was simply a form of applause. Doctors prescribed baths for everything: insomnia, indigestion, heartbreak. The afflicted, obediently submerged, convinced the water could wash sorrow away. They often emerged calmer, if only because drowning emotions requires patience. Hydrotherapy became theology disguised as hygiene. Each ripple whispered reassurance that suffering could be dissolved. The poor improvised. They filled metal tubs in kitchens, boiled herbs, and called it country spa. Steam fogged cracked windows, mixing with laughter. It wasn't luxury, but it was hope. Warmth was a universal healer, regardless of minerals or marble. If survival had a smell, it would be steam over clean skin. Advertisers turned baths into spectacle. Posters promised eternal youth in 10 soaks and electric water for modern nerves. Women in lace robes smiled beside improbable fountains. No one questioned why rejuvenation always required tickets. Commerce, like cleanliness, thrives on repetition. Men bathed for health, women for beauty. Doctors warned ladies not to overindulge, lest water weaken their constitution. Translation: fear of female autonomy. Even hygiene was gendered. Men were repaired, women restrained. Yet many women ignored the warnings, immersing themselves with quiet rebellion. Steam, after all, disguises defiance well. Children were bathed for discipline more than cleanliness. Cold plunges built character, mothers claimed, as shivering proved success. Tears were part of the cure. Every scream echoed moral hygiene, the belief that discomfort purified, modern humor, early exposure therapy without consent. Some enthusiasts drank the water, calling it internal bathing. It tasted like regret and pennies. Faith can make anything palatable. Pamphlets swore it cured melancholy. It didn't, but it gave people something to believe in between symptoms. At night, bathhouses emptied, their echo lingering. The smell of minerals faded into something gentler. Salt, warmth, resignation. People left lighter, not healthier, but convinced they'd done something good. Sometimes that illusion was enough. And outside, the fog welcomed them back, freshly bathed, newly hopeful, perfectly human in their confusion. A faint hum fills the room, not from machines, but anticipation. On a dressing table sits an object of wonder, the electric face, brush, brass and velvet, glowing faintly with menace. Victorian inventors sold devices like these by the thousands. Electricity, they said, was the essence of life. A shock could rejuvenate skin, cure baldness, or rekindle fading beauty. The logic was simple. If pain meant progress, why not plug it in? Women gathered in parlors to test the latest devices, galvanic belts, vitality combs, and magnetic corsets. Each promised miracles with a small spark and large imagination. The sensation was uncomfortable, the results invisible, but the experience intoxicating. To harness lightning was to flirt with divinity, dry humor, early skincare influencers, now battery-powered. Men weren't spared the trend. Baldness became the enemy of masculinity. Inventors sold electric helmets lined with copper wires designed to stimulate the scalp into gratitude. They hummed faintly while worn, creating the illusion of productivity. The only guaranteed result was static. Beauty manuals recommended electro-massage to improve complexion. Devices resembling telegraph equipment buzzed softly against cheeks, leaving faint burns disguised as blush. Women smiled bravely, convinced youth required voltage. Vanity became science's favorite investor. The smell of ozone mingled with rosewater, the scent of progress at its most absurd. Doctors published guides claiming electricity cured everything: wrinkles, fatigue, melancholy, even moral weakness. Clinics opened where patients sat connected by wires, faces glowing like small constellations. The shock was brief, the price not. It mattered because belief, not current, carried the charge. For the poor, beauty remained manual. Cold water, soap, and resolve. They watched the wealthy buzz and spark, unimpressed. Electricity was expensive optimism. Simplicity, though less glamorous, worked just as well. History rarely rewards practicality. Manufacturers competed fiercely. Ads showed angels holding batteries, promising celestial vitality. One product, the voltaic crown, claimed to channel genius through scalp stimulation. Another swore to restore feminine bloom. Most delivered mild confusion and singed hair. Still, the public adored them. Electricity felt like the future, mysterious, invisible, impossible to resist. In truth, many devices were harmless toys. The real danger came from imitation, unregulated machines with too much ambition. Some users fainted, others bragged. Pain was proof of participation. The Victorians had mastered marketing long before the word existed. Men and women recorded their afterglow in diaries. Tingling skin, clearer minds, strange dreams. They described the sensation as awakening the nerves. It was probably adrenaline, but who can blame them for romanticizing it? Progress always tingles before it disappoints. At night, when the machines fell silent, the smell of metal lingered in the air. The faint static crackle felt oddly intimate, like a whisper of something divine gone slightly wrong. You picture candlelight flickering on brass, sparks dying into darkness. The next morning, newspapers advertised new models, safer, sleeker, shinier lies. The promise repeated, beauty by battery, grace by galvanism. People kept buying because nothing feels cleaner than hope dressed as science. In the end, electricity didn't rejuvenate the body. It only illuminated the vanity of an age convinced that progress could be touched, and that every miracle must hum. You open a window to let the air in, and for the first time in history, people wonder what might be floating inside it. Before the germ theory, the Victorians believed smell was danger made visible, that disease rose from filth like smoke from a fire. The invisible terrified them. They could control soap, not air. And so they built rituals, burned incense, and prayed to the god of ventilation. Cleanliness became the exorcism of the unseen. Doctors carried canes filled with vinegar-soaked sponges, breathing through their inventions like early astronauts. Streets reeked of disinfectants and doubt. Hospitals smelled both holy and chemical, a paradox only fear could justify. When Louis Pasteur proved germs existed, London collectively gasped. The enemy finally had a name, and it was everywhere. Suddenly, dust turned sinister. Every cough was a sermon. Housewives scrubbed until walls bled paint. Servants boiled sheets daily, convinced salvation hid in steam. Advertisements sold germ-killing powders, sprays, and prayers. The idea of the invisible turned hygiene into obsession. Dry humor, the first subscription to paranoia. Mothers warned children not to play on grass where bad air lingered. Curtains were changed monthly, carpets beaten like sinners. The city looked cleaner, but it breathed exhaustion. Cleanliness had become not peace, but panic with polish. Inventors created germ-proof furniture, metal beds, washable walls, sanitary ceramics that gleamed like virtue. The clean aesthetic we now adore was born from fear, not fashion. The Victorians would scrub colour itself out of existence if it meant safety. White walls became theology. People began distrusting others' cleanliness. Handshakes turned cautious, kisses calculated. Public spaces became theatres of suspicion. Soap manufacturers thrived, selling purity in bars and pamphlets. Hygiene had become capitalism's favourite commandment, thou shalt disinfect. Even literature changed. Novels described washing scenes with erotic precision. The act of purification became both holy and human. Bathing, once shameful, was now seductive. Clean skin symbolized enlightenment, dirty hands, moral decay. Sin smelled. Salvation sparkled. Doctors began prescribing air baths, standing naked near open windows to refresh the lungs. Imagine Londoners quietly freezing themselves for virtue. The neighbours pretended not to see. The wind politely participated. If shame burned calories, the city was healthy indeed. Men carried pocket atomizers, spraying ozone essence into rooms to destroy invisible evil. Women wore lockets filled with disinfectant crystals. Perfume had evolved into armor. Every breath was a small prayer for survival. Of course, none of it worked perfectly. Germs didn't care for etiquette, but the rituals mattered. They gave structure to fear, and fear, when organized, feels almost elegant. Modern humor, mindfulness with bleach. By the 1890s, germ theory had changed architecture. Smooth surfaces replaced texture. Hospitals gleamed like temples. Cleanliness finally looked like comfort, though it never truly felt like it. The war on microbes was eternal, polite, and scented. And at night, as London slept under its spotless blankets, the real germs thrived quietly, laughing at human hope, microscopic proof that no ritual ever cleans the soul completely. Steam curls through the cracks of a modest bathroom, carrying the scent of lavender soap and expectation. For Victorians, bathing had become theatre, an act of virtue performed in private, yet meant for public approval. The clean body wasn't just admired, it was morally mandatory. People didn't wash for comfort, they washed for credibility. Soap was salvation, and water the confessional. Women's magazines preached hygiene as destiny. A well-bathed woman is a blessing to society, one article declared. The message was clear. Purity started in the pores. The line between hygiene and holiness blurred until they became interchangeable. You weren't just clean, you were correct. Bathhouses printed etiquette guides. Do not splash, do not speak, do not sin. Cleanliness required composure. Even relaxation had rules. People bathed with the solemnity of prayer, emerging purified but exhausted. Dry humor, holiness, now available in steam form. Men faced their own performance. Cold baths proved discipline. Hot baths, decadence. Self-control was measured in degrees, Celsius. Some enthusiasts boasted of bathing in icy rivers before dawn, claiming it built moral muscle. Modern equivalent, motivational podcasts, but wetter. Religious leaders embraced hygiene as divine duty. Preachers spoke of bathing the soul through the skin. Churches opened washhouses for the poor, baptizing cleanliness as charity. Soap manufacturers happily supplied donations, branding every sermon with subtle advertising. Even God, it seemed, had a product line. The poor viewed baths as luxury and judgment combined. Charitable bathhouses came with supervision, sermons, and suspicion. Cleanliness was generosity with conditions, yet people came grateful for warmth disguised as grace. Dignity often enters quietly through steam. Women's hygiene rituals grew ritualistic. Rosewater rinses, vinegar tonics, milk baths. Each step described in detail by magazines written by men. The absurdity was hidden beneath politeness. The bathroom became the stage for invisible labor, a woman scrubbing herself into societal acceptance. Children, too, were taught that dirt was sin. Clean hands make clean hearts, teachers said. Bathing became moral rehearsal. Parents watched with pride as small fingers pruned, proof that virtue had soaked in. The water turned grey with innocence lost and found again. Artists romanticized cleanliness. Paintings of women bathing glowed with holiness, light falling like revelation. What had once been private became public symbol, proof that civilization had conquered shame. The body was no longer just flesh, it was the temple of decency, but the paradox remained. The more they cleaned, the more aware they became of filth. Dirt migrated from streets to imagination. Perfection demanded endless pursuit. Cleanliness, like salvation, could never be finished. In the stillness after bathing, when the last drop of water cooled on skin, some must have realized the futility, that purity fades as easily as steam. But perhaps that was the point. Repetition as redemption. You wash not to stay clean, but to begin again. And as candles flickered against damp mirrors, the clean and the weary stared at their reflections, both glowing faintly with the same thought. Cleanliness, at its heart, was simply hope made visible. The city never truly cleaned itself, it just changed the lighting. Under gas lamps, grime looked romantic. Soot softened edges, gave faces depth. The poor called it London makeup, half joke, half pride. After all, dirt was proof of living, of having touched the world instead of avoiding it. When you wiped coal dust from your sleeve, you also wiped away evidence of participation. Clean skin felt sterile. The Victorians feared filth, but secretly missed its honesty. Writers noticed first. Dickens described fog as moral weather, coating everyone equally. Painters loved how smoke turned sunlight golden. Poets called it the city's sigh. What looked like decay became art. Dirt democratized beauty. It reminded people they shared the same air, the same struggle. Even perfume couldn't erase that truth. Factory workers carried the smell of labor home, a mixture of iron, sweat, and pride. They were judged for it, yet envied too. Their filth was authentic, earned, unpretentious. The rich mimicked the aesthetic through darker fabrics, pretending usefulness. Fashion has always borrowed sincerity from hardship. Children, of course, adored dirt, mud pies, puddles, soot on noses, all harmless rebellion. Parents scolded but smiled, recognizing freedom in grime. Cleanliness meant stillness, dirt meant play. Modern echo, adults paying for nature retreats to feel muddy again. Domestic manuals warned against moral laxity through dust. Housewives fought it daily, polishing surfaces until reflections apologized, yet some left a corner untouched, superstition or mercy. A little dust proved life continued, perfection, after all, looks suspicious. The obsession with sterility created emptiness. Rooms smelled of nothing, looked of nothing, felt of nothing. Visitors admired order, but hesitated to breathe. Filth, in contrast, was texture, the evidence of existence. A clean room whispered, a dirty one confessed. Even doctors began to question extremes. They noted that children raised too cleanly grew weaker. A little dirt strengthens character, one wrote. Science had rediscovered common sense. Nature prefers imperfection, so does sanity. Artists embrace decay as inspiration. Photographers captured peeling walls, rusted gates, unwashed faces. Beauty no longer required polish, it required truth. Victorian neatness began to crumble under its own gloss, replaced by realism, the poetry of imperfection. Perfume makers responded with irony, bottling earth scents, wet moss, smoke, leather. People paid to smell like the world they'd spent years escaping. Cleanliness had become performance. Filth, nostalgia. Religion, too, softened. Preachers spoke of humility rather than purity. Remember you are dust, they said, not as threat, but comfort. Dirt became theology again, a reminder that endings and beginnings share the same material. By century's end, the spotless home felt less like heaven, more like museum. The air lacked warmth, laughter, and occasionally oxygen. People longed for imperfection the way they once longed for virtue. And as another fog rolled in, thick and forgiving, London exhaled relief. The city looked itself again, flawed, fragrant, and finally believable. Evening falls, and with it, the city's perfume changes. The respectable fragrances fade first: lavender, lemon, rose. What remains is human: sweat, coal, bread, rain. It's not unpleasant, it's honest. Victorians feared that honesty. They called it vulgar effluence. Yet every forbidden smell carried a story. Each odour mapped to life, where someone worked, what they ate, whom they touched. To suppress smell was to erase biography. Odour was intimacy. Lovers recognized each other blindfolded. Mothers knew children by scent before sight. But society demanded deodorization. Perfume replaced familiarity with fiction. People learned to prefer strangers who smelled acceptable over friends who smelled alive. Civilization, in essence, was a polite nose blindness. Doctors catalogue smells like moral species, the odor of vice, the stench of poverty. They measured virtue in fragrance, sin in staleness. The poor were accused of infecting air itself. It mattered because prejudice always hides behind pseudoscience. Dry humor, racism once came in eau de toilette. Workplaces stank of industry, tanneries, breweries, soapworks. Yet those odors built empires. Prosperity had a smell, and it wasn't pleasant. Still, the rich sprayed lilac water over their guilt, pretending profit didn't reek. History is written by those with stronger perfume. At home, people experimented with scent control devices, burning pastilles, vinegar bowls, even ozone generators. The goal wasn't freshness, it was denial. The Victorian home became a scented bubble where reality waited outside, tapping politely at the window. Artists rebelled quietly. They painted kitchens steaming with life, markets thick with smells you could almost inhale from the canvas. Critics called it indecent, audiences called it real. Art reintroduced odor to imagination. Writers followed. Novels began describing smell again. Bread baking, horses sweating, lovers trembling. The page breathed. Readers rediscovered empathy through nostrils. You can't judge a character once you've smelled their fear. Perfume houses adapted, marketing earthy modernity. Bottles labeled smoke, rain, dust. The circle closed. Society buying back what it had outlawed, nostalgia in atomized form, humanity repackaged with a bow. Meanwhile, science caught up. Bacteriology explained what noses already knew. Smell is memory in motion. Each odor triggers recall deeper than thought. Victorians didn't understand neurology, they felt the truth, that scent is the shortest path to the soul. Even in churches, incense returned stronger than ever. The same society that once feared odor now prayed through it. Smoke curled upward, carrying both confession and contradiction. Perhaps God, too, prefers realism. By the final decades, smell lost its shame. Streets, kitchens, and even factories were celebrated in print and paint. The human aroma, once banished, became culture's heartbeat again. And tonight, as you imagine those cobbled streets, remember this. The Victorians cleaned the world, but couldn't sterilize themselves. Their perfumes faded, their disinfectants dried, but their scent, and that mix of soap, smoke, and sincerity, still drifts through time, reminding you that truth always leaves a trace. The sound of scrubbing begins before dawn, a rhythm older than alarm clocks. Buckets rattle, brushes scrape, water sloshes like slow applause. In Victorian homes, cleanliness wasn't habit, it was occupation. Every day, walls, floors, and soles were washed of invisible shame. The smell of carbolic soap hung in the air like discipline. The house itself seemed alive, breathing through its chores. If dirt was sin, these homes were cathedrals of repentance. Servants led the symphony, bare hands in boiling water, knees pressed to cold stone floors. Their uniforms stayed crisp only in portraits. Reality smelled of sweat and starch. They polished silver until reflections apologized for existing. Cleaning was their prayer, repetition their rosary. Every swipe erased evidence of effort, as if work could be invisible enough to count as virtue. The mistress inspected daily, gloved finger gliding along mantles. A speck of dust meant moral failure. She scolded softly, as if purity depended on tone. "Cleanliness next to godliness," she murmured, forgetting who knelt for both. Houses gleamed, people dimmed, air itself needed polishing. Windows opened briefly, then shut in panic against imagined miasma. Curtains trapped stale dignity. Rooms smelled of beeswax, lemon, and fatigue. Guests praised freshness, never noticing the exhaustion woven into every fragrance. Clean air, ironically, came from overworked lungs. Children tiptoed through perfection, warned not to touch, smear, or breathe too deeply. They learned early that cleanliness demanded stillness. Play was postponed until adulthood, when it became rebellion. Childhood under Victorian order smelled faintly of soap and silence. Laundry days were battles. Boiling tubs, wrung sheets, steam rising like reluctant ghosts. Women lost skin to lie and pride to repetition. Clean linen waved outside windows, banners of temporary victory. The whiteness blinded, yet soot fell again by sunset. The city was relentless, so were they. The rich furnished with ornate clutter, velvet drapes, carved wood, endless surfaces to dust. The poor owned less, but cleaned more. Both lived inside the same paradox. The harder you worked, the less it showed. Cleanliness was a mirage reflected in candlelight. Even meals obeyed hygiene. Tables were scrubbed raw, dishes boiled, crumbs hunted like crimes. The smell of polish mingled with roasting meat, civilization's perfume. Guests praised the hostess's refinement. Servants collapsed quietly afterward, the applause audible only to walls. Night brought no rest. Ashes needed clearing, lamps trimming, coals banking. Every task delayed fatigue, never defeated it. The house hummed with low labor, a heartbeat powered by invisible hands. Illness was the only sanctioned pause. A sick servant earned brief pity, replaced before recovery. Health itself was measured in output. Cleanliness, ironically, destroyed the bodies that produced it. Dry humor, hygiene as hazard. By candle's end, silence returned. Floors gleamed under sleeping masters, proof that devotion doesn't always look divine. The servants' quarters smelled of soap and skin, the scent of endurance. And when dawn broke, the ritual began again. The same scrubbing, the same sighs, the same beautiful futility. In the morning hush, the first footsteps you hear aren't those of lords, but maids carrying buckets. Britain's empire was polished by people who never owned what they touched. Servants outnumbered masters, their labor unseen yet indispensable. The entire illusion of order, white gloves, shining silver, fragrant halls, rested on tired shoulders. History remembers monarchs. The soap belonged to someone else. Housemaids woke before sunlight. Their hands cracked from lie, their backs ached from loyalty. Still, they moved quietly, almost invisible. To be noticed meant trouble. A well-trained servant left no trace except cleanliness itself, an art of subtraction. Modern analogy, customer service without weekends. The butler ruled the hierarchy below stairs, precise, proud, perpetually polite. His voice carried authority wrapped in discretion. Beneath him, the housemaids, cooks, and scullery girls formed the nervous system of the household. They knew every secret, stains, letters, scandals. They cleaned both messes and memories. Kitchen servants faced the worst heat, steam-coated ceilings, grease clung to walls. Their world smelled of onions, ash, and ambition. Still, there was camaraderie, laughter echoing through fatigue, songs hummed over boiling pots. Survival made community. The kitchen was the empire's true parliament. Laundry maids lived in perpetual fog. Steam, starch, and sweat blurred their world. They ironed the city's conscience one sleeve at a time. Their lungs carried more detergent than air. Doctors called it washerwoman's lung. Society called it duty. Health was expendable when purity was visible. Upper servants wore respectability like armor. Black coats, measured tones, impeccable posture. Yet beneath politeness simmered quiet rebellion. They mimicked aristocratic manners, blurred class lines through imitation. Cleanliness wasn't just survival, it was disguise. Children of servants inherited fatigue. Few escaped the cycle. Even charity schools trained them for better servitude. Tidier, quieter, more efficient chains. The empire's moral foundation rested on polished floors and resigned smiles. Some mistresses prided themselves on kindness, allowing servants one afternoon off per fortnight. Freedom came measured in teaspoons. Yet even in stolen hours, many chose to nap, not wander. Rest was luxury unlearned. Servants also became inadvertent educators. They taught hygiene to the families they served, their wisdom dismissed as instinct. Recipes for cleaning stains or whitening linen travelled upward, anonymous and unpaid. Civilization's knowledge often comes from calloused hands. When industrial cleaning products emerged, servants tested them first, scrubbing innovation into existence. Burns, blisters, and chemical rashes marked progress. Ads later claimed gentle on hands, never mentioning whose hands proved it. As machinery and middle-class pride rose, live-in servants declined. The era ended with quiet relief and nostalgia. Cleanliness, once collective, became solitary. People missed the perfection, not the people. By the turn of the century, the ghosts of servants remained. Polished furniture, folded sheets, invisible gratitude. The empire's shine endured, glowing faintly under electric light, built on a million small sacrifices that history conveniently forgot to dust. The city dims, one lamp at a time, until only the sound of mops remains. Water drips in rhythm, a lullaby for those who never stop tidying. In Victorian households, night didn't end the day, it polished it. Every evening carried its own choreography. Hearth swept, coals arranged, surfaces wiped of evidence. Cleanliness had to sleep beside its keeper. The house exhaled quietly, like an old violin put back in its case, strings still humming. Maids moved like ghosts, Slippers whispering across marble floors, they extinguished candles with small brass bells, then dusted the air as though memories lingered there. Each gesture meant control, a promise that morning would find everything obedient. Their bodies ached, but repetition soothed them. Order was the only lullaby they trusted. The smell of soap hung sweetly in corridors, mixing with fading dinners and damp cloth. It was comfort and commandment in one breath. The day might have been chaotic, but the night could still be redeemed by scrubbing. Modern humor, insomnia, cured by bleach. Children were tucked into sheets ironed to near-paper stiffness. Mothers whispered prayers about virtue and ventilation. Sleep well, stay pure, they said, meaning both body and soul. Windows cracked slightly open, enough to invite cold, not sin. Fresh air was health in invisible form. Men performed their own rituals. Shoes brushed, collars aired, hair pomaded for tomorrow. Respectability slept beside them, never fully undressed. Even dreams were expected to be tidy. Guilt arrived only in unpressed trousers. For the poor, rituals were simpler. Sweeping dirt outside instead of washing it away. Tin basins replaced porcelain. Candles replaced gaslight. Yet even in scarcity, they sought the same peace. To leave the day behind, cleaner than they found it. A small act of defiance against chaos. Public spaces had their own night routine. Streets washed by horse-drawn carts, gutters rinsed, lamps refueled. The city itself practiced ablution. Rain helped when it could, baptizing cobblestones no one thanked. The smell afterward, wet stone and faint sewage, became London's bedtime fragrance. Shopkeepers scrubbed doorsteps, believing cleanliness drew customers. Bakers wiped counters, grocers swept aisles. Each motion carried superstition. Dirt discouraged fortune, hygiene and hope, always a pair. Hospitals glowed faintly under gaslight as nurses mopped corridors. Disinfectant burned the air, proof that safety had a smell. The sick slept surrounded by bleach and prayer, both equally medicinal. By midnight, the city grew still. Brooms leaned in corners like retired soldiers. The moon reflected on polished windows, admiring itself. The streets shimmered faintly, wet and weary. Inside, the servants finally rested. Their dreams smelled faintly of lavender and fatigue. Tomorrow would be identical, which was strangely comforting. Repetition has a way of lulling even exhaustion into peace. And above them, the city breathed clean again, for a few brief hours before life dirtied it with mourning. The Victorian bed was a battlefield disguised as comfort. Mattresses stuffed with horsehair, blankets heavy as guilt, and air so cold you could see your prayers. Sleep, like cleanliness, required ceremony. You didn't just lie down, you prepared, repented, and positioned yourself toward moral alignment. The phrase sleep hygiene wasn't coined yet, but they lived it with religious precision. Beds were made tight enough to discipline thought. Doctors advised lying flat to ensure moral posture. Rest wasn't indulgence, it was duty. People believed a well-arranged bed kept nightmares and sins from multiplying. Women braided their hair to prevent energetic entanglement. Men avoided napping fully clothed, lest laziness stain the soul. Everything about rest required intention. Even dreams were expected to behave. Bedrooms smelled of starch and coal. Candles flickered behind lace, shadows trembling like modest secrets. Silence held authority, even the floorboards learned restraint. If you listened closely, you could hear the heartbeat of the house, slow, steady, civilized. Windows mattered. Airflow was moral philosophy, too little and one invited disease, too much and one invited scandal. Curtains fluttered with discretion. You could almost feel the city breathing through 100 cautious drafts. Doctors prescribed bedtime tonics, milk with brandy, vinegar teas, morphine-laced syrups. The line between medicine and mercy blurred comfortably. Sleep was valuable enough to risk mild poisoning. Some households installed sleep clocks, devices that hissed lavender vapor at intervals to purify air. They smelled divine and did nothing. Still, placebo was progress. Calmness, once performed, often arrived out of politeness. Poor families shared beds, bodies arranged like spoons in solidarity. Warmth was communal, privacy optional. The rhythm of breathing became lullaby, fatigue, democracy. They slept deeply not from peace, but exhaustion. In wealthier homes, insomnia became fashionable, proof of sensitivity and intellect. Poets bragged about sleepless nights. Philosophers romanticized candle-lit anxiety. Rest was for those without ambition. Society applauded suffering that looked intelligent. Children, meanwhile, fell asleep instantly. Their rooms filled with the soft rustle of dreams unregulated. Parents peeked in with envy. Somewhere between childhood and respectability, rest became complicated. Morning arrived not as relief, but obligation. Sheets were inspected, pillows fluffed, air renewed, even sleep left work behind. The bed became both sanctuary and stage, proof that virtue never truly clocks out. And when dawn finally brushed across the curtains, the city stretched awake, spotless once more, unaware that the dream of cleanliness had cost another night of rest. Dawn comes quietly, a pale hand brushing through the fog. The city exhales its night, releasing the last scent of soap and smoke. You feel it? The hush before routine begins again. In Victorian London, mornings were not just for washing faces, they were for washing spirits. Cleanliness had moved inward, from basin to belief. People spoke softly, as though purity might scatter if handled too loudly. The day began with water and intention, two ingredients of hope. Devout households blended prayer and hygiene seamlessly. Clean hands, clean hearts, mothers whispered, filling basins with cold water that bit like conscience. The ritual was less about dirt, more about starting pure. They believed that rinsing away yesterday's fatigue could reset the soul, as if forgiveness came in liquid form. Servants washed before their masters stirred, the rhythm of water echoing through corridors. It wasn't vanity, it was renewal. Even exhaustion deserved a clean face. The first splash on the cheeks felt like remembrance, proof that survival continued, quietly. Soap advertisements began quoting scripture. Purity had become marketable. Wash and be made whole, they promised. Each bar sold morality disguised as lather. It mattered because commerce and faith both thrive on repetition. The act of cleansing became the day's first small sermon. Morning light revealed imperfections the night had hidden. Streaks on mirrors, dust motes, dancing like thoughts uninvited. Yet there was beauty in that honesty. The Victorians didn't see dust as failure anymore. They saw it as evidence of living. Cleanliness had matured from obsession to acceptance. Doctors now spoke of mental hygiene, a phrase still new and fragile. They argued that the mind, like skin, needed ventilation. Reading poetry, walking outdoors, resting between tasks, these were the new forms of washing. The soul, it seemed, could also gather soot. Writers took the metaphor further. A man's thoughts must be scrubbed like silver, one essay declared. The sentence lingered, half satire, half sincerity. The Victorians had begun to realize that the dirtiest places were invisible, and for the first time, soap wasn't enough. Evening prayers echoed this idea. "Forgive what clings," people whispered, imagining their mistakes as stains on unseen fabric. Religion had learned from laundry, guilt, like grease, required agitation before release, dry humor, faith as detergent. In public, cleanliness became gentler. Charity replaced judgment. Bathhouses open to all, no sermons attached, the water no longer accused, it welcomed. Washing was no longer proof of virtue, it was permission to rest. Homes adapted too. Bedrooms grew lighter, curtains thinner, air freer. People finally trusted drafts again. The obsession with sealing the world out softened into a desire to let it in, filtered by gratitude rather than fear. And outside, the city shimmered faintly. The fog still carried yesterday's soot, but also something tender, the fragrance of rain over effort. London wasn't clean, but it was honest. You realize then, cleanliness was never the goal. It was the excuse to pause, to begin again, to remember that even the dirtiest days end with light-touching water. By late morning, sunlight presses through lace curtains, gentle and forgiving. You can almost hear the dust sigh. In Victorian thought, purity wasn't just a virtue, it was architecture. Everything had order, lines, colors, behaviors, arranged toward a single purpose, harmony. Yet beneath that symmetry lay restlessness. To be pure was to be unfinished, always polishing toward an ideal that retreated with every wipe. Cleanliness promised peace, but it often delivered pressure. Philosophers began debating what pure even meant. Could a spotless world still feel alive? They noted how the pursuit of perfection often sterilized joy. A table too clean discouraged touch, a life too clean discouraged risk. Cleanliness had become both shield and prison. Artists rebelled softly. Paintings grew looser, brushstrokes visible like breath marks. "Truth is texture," one critic wrote. The line stuck. The age of polish was ending, and imperfection was becoming fashionable again, not as rebellion, but as relief. Poets compared dust to memory. "We cannot love what we will not soil," one wrote, and people nodded, half embarrassed by recognition. They had been chasing virtue so long they forgot affection requires fingerprints. Clean hearts, it turned out, still needed warmth. Even science surrendered a little. Doctors stopped scolding and started listening. They spoke of balance rather than purity. Germs weren't demons anymore. They were neighbors to coexist with carefully. The war on filth softened into diplomacy. Homes reflected this shift. White walls gained color. Heavy curtains fell away. Families kept windows open longer, trusting air again. Cleanliness became comfort instead of conquest. People finally admitted what the body always knew. A little imperfection keeps life breathing. Churches, too, adjusted their sermons. Instead of preaching spotless living, they spoke of compassion. "Blessed are the stained who keep trying," one preacher said. It was the closest Victorian theology ever came to grace. Writers began romanticizing decay. Old buildings, weathered hands, wrinkled linen, all proof that beauty endures through use. "Purity," one novelist wrote, "is simply experience that hasn't lived yet." Dry humor, a compliment disguised as philosophy. Perfume followed fashion. The sharp, disinfectant scents of early hygiene gave way to warmth, amber, musk, rain-soaked wood. The world was learning to smell human again. Civilization, at last, exhaled. By evening, when lamps flicker on and the city hums gently, you sense the change. The air no longer insists on cleanliness. It allows it, like permission instead of command. You feel lighter. The house doesn't need to gleam. It just needs to glow. Outside, rain begins again, washing streets not of sin, but of noise. The city smells alive. And somewhere in that scent lies the truth the Victorians never fully named. Purity was never the absence of dirt, but the presence of care. And as you drift towards sleep, that idea lingers. The world doesn't have to be spotless to be sacred. Sometimes it's the smudge that makes the light worth seeing. The sound of water returns, quiet, rhythmic, forgiving. A basin fills in the corner of a quiet room, light trembling on its surface. Victorians often spoke of water as memory, believing it could carry sins away and stories with it. Each wash, each pour, was both a cleansing and a confession. You imagine the bowl gleaming under candlelight, the reflection soft as breath. In that moment, water was time itself, fluid, weightless, always beginning again. They believed water remembered kindness, that it carried the shape of hands that used it. Baths were never just physical, they were emotional geography. You stepped into warmth not only to clean, but to return. The scent of soap was less about perfume, more about reassurance. The body, after all, remembers differently than the mind. Some mornings, people spoke to their water. They whispered gratitude, apology, or silent questions. It was superstition disguised as tenderness. The Victorians never fully understood psychology, but they understood ritual, the need to repeat what brings calm, even if logic stays silent. Servants poured leftover water onto gardens. Roses bloomed brighter, perhaps from minerals, perhaps from intention. The act created quiet poetry. Yesterday's fatigue nurturing tomorrow's fragrance. Cleanliness had become cyclical. Nothing wasted, not even worry. Writers compared washing to prayer. Both required surrender. Both left you damp and lighter. Faith and hygiene shared the same verbs: rinse, cleanse, renew. Maybe that's why cleanliness never left religion. It spoke the same language of repetition and hope. Doctors began studying the effect of water temperature on mood. Cold invigorated, warm soothed. People discovered that what felt like science was simply kindness disguised as data. Bathing was self-respect expressed physically. You didn't have to believe in purity, you only had to believe in care. At night, some kept bowls of water by the bed, to wash hands or thoughts before sleeping. The gesture was small but meaningful. Even if the world stayed dirty, one corner of it could remain gentle. The sound of pouring water became lullaby in many homes. Dripping taps annoyed some, comforted others. To the weary, it was proof of life continuing. Each drop a heartbeat, each ripple an echo of something older than fear. Poets described reflections as fragile ghosts. In water, one wrote, we meet ourselves briefly and forgive. That line travelled far, printed in cheap magazines, murmured in boarding houses. Forgiveness, it seemed, came easiest in liquid form. By the end of the century, water pipes reached almost every London home. It was progress, but it also felt like intimacy, industrialized. The private ritual of washing became mechanical, yet some still filled bowls by hand, preferring the slowness, the sound, the moment. Even now, when you wash your face, you repeat a gesture older than language, the same soft rhythm, the same surrender. History hides in such motions. You are cleaner, not because you removed dirt, but because you remembered to care. And the water, if it could speak, would whisper back. It remembers you too. Somewhere, a bell rings. The city stirs, light seeps into narrow streets, painting cobblestones with silver calm. London after washing is almost gentle, steam lifting from rooftops, chimney smoke thinning into ribbons. You feel the slow pulse of morning, the weight of quiet work beneath it. Every clean surface gleams faintly, like pride left overnight to dry. The air smells of rain and soap and something else. Relief. Servants yawn behind closed doors. Housewives stretch, hearing the first clatter of milk carts. Shopkeepers lift shutters, broom in hand. The day repeats its promises, unchanged yet forgiven. Cleanliness, at dawn, isn't achievement, it's possibility. The city doesn't start over, it simply exhales and tries again. Church bells echo through mist, not sermons, but reminders. Each sound says, another chance. Streets glisten like mirrors. The reflection isn't perfect, but that's what makes it believable. Progress is never spotless. It's smudged by sincerity. Factories roar back to life, chimneys coughing grey truth into the morning. The cleanliness of night dissolves quickly, but that's all right. Beauty never asked to last. The soot returns, but so does the scrubbing, life's most consistent conversation. A woman wipes her windowsill, humming softly. A man rinses his boots. Children laugh, chasing puddles. The rituals resume with quiet acceptance. Cleanliness has become not an ideal, but an act of participation. Proof that living still matters. By midday, the city shines and sweats again. Streets pulse. Voices rise, smells return. You can almost taste the air. Metallic, sweet, slightly human. The cycle is complete. Dirt arrives, cleanliness follows, both necessary to each other. The world breathes through its own imperfection. Writers call it resilience. Preachers call it grace. But to the ordinary Londoner, it's just another day of doing one's best against the inevitable. Soap, sunlight, effort, humble miracles. And yet, beneath the routine, something has changed. Cleanliness no longer feels anxious, it feels kind. The act of washing no longer declares superiority, it whispers continuity. It says, I'm still here. By afternoon, the scent of fresh laundry drifts from alleys. Windows glint. Children nap in clean sheets. Even the air hums softly, as if purring. The city may never conquer filth, but it has learned to coexist with it gracefully. As dusk approaches again, gas lamps flicker to life. The cycle restarts. Another night, another wash, another small redemption. The sound of water returns, softer now, familiar. And as you watch that world fade into mist, you understand what the Victorians, in all their scrubbing and striving, never said aloud. Cleanliness was never about dirt at all. It was about the longing to feel worthy of rest. You close your eyes. The city continues without you. Its rhythm steady, its breath warm. The soap cools on porcelain. The air sweetens with sleep. And just before dreams arrive, you hear it, the quiet splash of water remembering you, once more, into peace. The night is gentle now. The city hums beneath a soft quilt of mist. You can almost feel the warmth of chimney smoke fading into the stars. Somewhere, a candle sighs and goes out. What's left is stillness, not empty, but full. Every drop of effort, every scrubbed floor, every breath of soap and steam has led to this. Quietness, earned through care. You sit with that feeling for a while, not pride, not relief. Something deeper, softer. The kind of peace that comes only after repetition. You think of all those hands, the maids, the mothers, the tired men, who cleaned not just homes, but ours. They didn't chase perfection, they chased belonging. They wanted the world to be gentle enough to rest inside. And now here you are, centuries later, breathing in their rhythm, washing the noise of the day from your thoughts. You realize the point was never to be spotless. It was to remember that care itself is sacred, that every act of cleaning, every small attempt to bring order is just love disguised as labor. Outside your window, rain begins again, a sound too soft to wake you. Drops trace lazy paths down glass, blurring the city into watercolor. The world cleans itself in its own slow language. And you, listening, begin to understand it. You feel your breathing slow. Shoulders unclench. The air grows heavier, kinder. History folds itself around you like linen warmed by firelight. Somewhere, a clock ticks, not to remind you of time passing, but of peace arriving. You think of the Victorians again, all their striving, scrubbing, fearing, and hoping. They believed cleanliness was proof of virtue. But maybe they were chasing something simpler, the permission to stop, to feel worthy of rest, to finally, quietly let go. And now, as your eyes grow heavy, you find that same permission waiting for you too. Small, invisible, patient. You don't have to finish the story tonight. The world will still be here, imperfect and alive, when you wake. So breathe. Let the air move gently through you. Let the dust of thought settle. The candle burns low. The water stills. The city sleeps. And you too are finally clean enough to dream. If this helped you rest, leave a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Good night.